To kick off this month, the 9th of February saw popular social media communication platform Discord announce that it intended to implement a global teen by default setting for all users by early March. Discord staff claim this age assurance feature is being implemented to build a safer experience for teens on the platform, but many users are skeptical of their true intentions. The move comes amidst a seemingly global push to implement age and ID verifications when using online services. In December, Australia became the first country to ban social media access to users under 16, a move the British government is currently considering. France, India, and Spain are also eyeing similar systems. As for why Discord would make such an unpopular change, the answer is likely related to the company confidentially filing for an IPO in early January. With Discord going public, it's likely that the company wants to reduce its potential for liability to potential shareholders. As for users, however, although companies tend to have a lot more available cash after going public, this usually comes in the form of a more aggressive business model. Canadian writer Cory Doctorow initially coined the term "inshitification" in late 2022 in regard to online products and services. Inshitification states that as the need to satisfy shareholders increases, the quality of offerings to the customer is degraded to increase profits. The term has been applied to Amazon's obsession with adding fees to increase profits, dating apps shifting to pay-to-win models, and Twitter's shift following its acquisition by Elon Musk. On a similar note, most users don't like the thought of providing personal information to access a service that it never needed before. On the day of the announcement, web browser searches for alternative platforms to Discord jumped by 10,000%, with platforms such as Stoat and TeamSpeak seeing a dramatic surge in users. Days after the first official announcement, Discord staff further clarified that the vast majority of users will continue using the platform without any additional age verification steps. When Australia implemented its own age verification laws, platforms used a combination of typing habits and content interests to guess the age of its users. Only users assumed to be under the age threshold were asked to verify themselves. Discord claims the age assurance process will only involve submissions of video selfies, or review of self-submitted government forms of identification. The company went on to claim that facial scans never leave your personal devices, that platform and vendor partners never receive those video files, and proof of government IDs are immediately deleted upon age confirmation. They clarified that personal identity will never be associated with your Discord account. With this in mind, many users of the platform are still concerned. Only 4 months ago, and upwards of 70,000 users had their photo IDs leaked due to a targeted cyber attack on one of Discord's terminated vendor partners, C5A. Perhaps a more damning turn of events was during a trial run of their age assurance technology within the United Kingdom. In a now deleted alert message on Discord's support page, a notification stated that users within the United Kingdom would have their personal IDs temporarily stored for up to 7 days, within another of Discord's data vendors, Persona. Persona, a digital verification service, was founded in 2018 and went on to receive a $150 million investment round by Founders Fund, a venture capital fund co-founded by billionaire Peter Thiel. We could probably dedicate an entire video to Thiel himself, as he's been described as everything from a militarist techno-libertarian to a democracy skeptic authoritarian. Even Thiel's biographer Max Chafkin admits that what he actually wants is a mystery. Even if you've never heard of Peter Thiel, you might have heard of his company Palantir, which develops data integration and analytics platforms. Palantir essentially connects unrelated databases from multiple sources, and allows governments and companies to use this data to streamline tasks. While not inherently bad, the technology has been used by the Israeli government for its predictive policing, and America's ICE by using health data to track down potential deportation targets. In the interest of transparency, Peter Thiel was also associated with Jeffrey Epstein, with a company he founded in 2010 accepting $40 million from the now-deceased sex trafficker. Shortly after the 26 referendum that kicked off Brexit, Epstein would email Thiel, quote, "Brexit, just the beginning," and would later go on to clarify, quote, "Return to tribalism, counter to globalization, amazing new alliances. You and I both agree zero interest rates were too high. And as I said in your office, finding things on their way to collapse was much easier than finding the next bargain." With this in mind, Discord users weren't pleased to find out they may have to provide private information to a company partly funded by an Epstein-affiliated data-obsessed democracy skeptic tech billionaire. It should be noted that neither Palantir nor Persona have had a single data breach incident, but this doesn't make them bulletproof. In particular, the deleted message that stated a person's data will be stored for 7 days is a particular point of concern, especially because it was called an experiment. Fuck knows what that means. Public pressure would further mount against Discord, as the middle of the month would see researchers find an exposed front end for Persona. What they found was that instead of just verifying age, Persona's system was performing 269 checks on users, including facial recognition against watch lists. It also collected IP addresses, device fingerprints, government ID numbers, names and faces, and stored them for up to 3 years. Discord states that their experiment with Persona has concluded, and that it will primarily be using the KID for age verification going forward. KID's core feature is being able to process images and documents on a device itself, meaning the only information Discord would receive is whether or not the user is an adult. As you can see, there's a very big difference between software that only marks a person with a simple account verification, and one owned by a shady billionaire that collects 269 sensitive account metrics.
No, I like it. This is brilliant.
As for the future of Discord, we don't know when such an IPO will ultimately happen. 5 years ago, Microsoft floated the idea of acquiring Discord for $10 billion, but talks later fell through. While there are no official reports as of right now, the chance of a large corporation buying Discord is still within the realm of possibility. As crazy as it might sound, Microsoft owning Discord is probably the best ending users of the platform can hope for. Viewers who are concerned about their online privacy might be interested in today's sponsor. Whether you're looking to jimmy up your privacy, or you just want to give region locks the 23 skidoo, you're gonna want a VPN. And lucky for you, our sponsor Surfshark is the best damn VPN from Rhodesia to Siam. Not only can Surfshark save you from tricksy trackers, manic malware, and fucked fishers, but Surfshark can also scan your email correspondence for any signs that you're about to become another scammed Sammy. Users will also get access to Surfshark's newfangled Clean Web 2.0 feature, which will let you turn off ads as easy as flicking a light switch. Just like magic, all ads from websites to YouTube will be gone in a flash, sent back to the depths of hell where they belong. And of course, we can't forget those pesky region locks. If you can't find what you're looking for online, simply swap to any one of the 100 other locations across the globe, and enjoy your newfound freedom as an unshackled citizen of the world. The damn commies don't see borders, and now neither will you. The best part of all is that if you don't find yourself 100% satisfied, you can back out in the first 30 days and get a full refund for any reason at all. Why, just look at poor Billy here, refunding due to his own incompetence. You'll figure it out next time, Billy, to make the deal even sweeter by going to surfshark.com/SirSwag, using the code SirSwag, or scanning this QR Who's It on screen. You'll also score yourself an extra 4 months on the house. Surfshark VPN. It's cheaper than the other ones. Meanwhile, a South Korean governor suggests importing women to boost birth rates. A man breaks into a pizza restaurant and starts making and selling pizzas. And Pokemon Go removes a Pokestop on Epstein Island. Moving on to the United States, and the Trump administration has dismantled the endangerment finding this month, a key Obama-era ruling that serves as the legal basis to regulate greenhouse gases. The 2009 ruling determined that as greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, such emissions can be regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency. By reversing this ruling, the EPA no longer has the authority to regulate emissions, and current emission laws have become far easier to challenge. Celebrating the repealed ruling, President Trump called the move the single largest deregulatory action in American history, while EPA Secretary Lee Zeldin stated in his own words, quote, "The endangerment finding and the regulations that were based on it didn't just regulate emissions, it regulated and targeted the American dream." When President Trump was later asked about the environmental concerns of the rollback, he would respond, quote, "Don't worry about it. This has nothing to do with public health. This is all a scam, a giant scam." This radical rule became became the legal foundation for the Green New Scam, one of the greatest scams in history. The most obvious impact of this new climate policy is on the auto industry. The White House claimed that due to the deregulation of emission standards, vehicles will become an average of $2,400 cheaper to manufacture, and ultimately amount to $1.3 trillion in savings by 2055. What they didn't mention is that the same EPA report that determined those figures, it also stated that it would cost an additional $1.4 trillion in increased expenses. This is due to increased fuel purchases, vehicle repair and maintenance, insurance, and traffic congestion and noise. This means that instead of saving $1.3 trillion, the net societal cost of repealing the endangerment finding is actually $180 billion. Viewers should keep in mind that this isn't from a competing study. We're using the same report the White House used to justify axing the law in the first place.
I was elected to lead, not to read.
Of course, this also isn't considering any costs related to the environment. One estimate from the Environmental Defense Fund found that repealing the endangerment finding could cost as much as $4.7 trillion over the next 2 decades due to extreme weather and other impacts of climate change. The Climate Defense Fund also estimated that the rollback will result in up to 58,000 premature deaths and an additional 37 million asthma attacks. Just to properly put into perspective how absurd this is, the US government is essentially paying $180 billion for the privilege of randomly killing 58,000 people. They could literally kill that many people with 58,000 individual Predator missiles, and it would still be 20 times cheaper than repealing the endangerment finding. The savings for US automakers is also a disputed figure, as although cars could theoretically be manufactured at a lower cost, reduced emission standards could entirely exclude them from selling in other markets. The reversal itself is expected to be hit with a myriad of legal challenges, in large part because the Trump administration can't actually dispute its scientific merits. In 2025, the administration set up a council of 5 hand-picked contrarian climate scientists who wrote a report called A Critical Review of Impacts of Greenhouse Gas Emissions on the US Climate. The report went on to be laughed at by the climate science community at large, was bombarded by legal challenges, and was eventually met with a 135-page report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine debunking it. This is why the Trump administration is expected to challenge the legal wording of the endangerment finding, notably the definition of air pollution, as that would require the effects of pollution to specifically be local or regional. To better understand the impact of repealing the endangerment finding, we talked to climate scientist Kyle Buffington from Oregon State University. As you might have guessed, Buffington thought that dismantling the endangerment finding was generally a bad idea. In his own words, quote, "The dismantlement of the endangerment finding has been a sort of nail in the coffin for treating climate science as a political issue. The fact that it has been formally repealed signifies the turning point from which scientific analyses at agencies like the EPA are treated as political parlance. On top of that, employment opportunities at agencies like the NOAA and the National Weather Service have become unstable. What were once positions of lifelong research and service to the public have been reduced to jobs which can be cut or ignored at the inauguration of a single president. The defunding of research programs will send a clear signal to students to second-guess their choice of career, a negative effect that probably no executive order should ever have." When we went on to ask Kyle about how any of this might affect the average person, he had this to say. Quote, "The repeal of the endangerment finding, if it persists, will cause numerous downstream effects on Americans through climate change impacts and continued emissions. If left completely unchecked, the United States will remain a key player in the carbon footprint of the global north. Wildfires, heat waves, sea level rise, droughts and other impacts are guaranteed to exist in the future. What the Trump administration has done is further invite these catastrophes into the United States and the world at large. Even beyond the greenhouse gases, weakened environmental policy is making it possible for toxic pollution like soot and mercury to go unregulated in areas that already experience social and environmental stresses. While we had Mr. Buffington, we also wanted to clear up another point that had been bothering us. Since before Trump was elected, he's always used the phrase clean, beautiful coal.
And we have ended the war on beautiful, clean coal.
We're slashing unnecessary regulations that targeted the beautiful, clean coal.
There is a thing called clean coal.
I call it beautiful, clean coal. I told my people never use the word coal unless you put beautiful, clean before it. Right, Doc? Beautiful, clean coal. Beautiful, clean coal.
With this in mind, we wanted to ask Buffington whether there was such a thing as clean coal. In his own words, quote, "Not only is there no such thing as clean coal, it happens to be the highest carbon-emitting fossil fuel of the three. Coal versus oil versus gas. Historically, it's also been associated with nasty pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, which cause acid rain and smog respectively. Needless to say, the thought of unregulated coal power plants is absolutely terrifying. No coal is clean, and no coal is beautiful. We were going to stop here when it comes to talking about the US government's current obsession with coal, until we found out something truly special. On the 23rd of January, Secretary Doug Burgum posted this image of himself with a little guy called Coley. The new spokesperson of the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement. Coley is prominently used in the OSMRE website in a variety of AI-generated images explaining what the department does. We know they're AI generated because of this guy's fucked up sleeve, this blue car being parked on the footpath next to a fucked up triangular car park, the truck in the back having rear view mirrors on one side and not the other, and the American flag only having 45 stars and 11 stripes. With this in mind, the secretary's photo was immediately spammed with what can only be described as non-canonical Coley lore. This included putting Coley in a bikini, having Coley arrested for tax evasion, and Coley getting killed off altogether. None of this is particularly relevant to the endangerment finding, but we know you'd never forgive us if you found out we'd sat on this information. The biggest question that remains for such a landmark decision is why it's being made in the first place, and this is a section we really struggled with. The announcement on the official White House website briefly goes over the $1.3 trillion figure that we talked about before, but the vast majority of the article is in the form of statements made by various institutions. When we started looking into these institutions, we began to notice a pattern. The CO2 Coalition, for example, sounded like an environmental group, but the entire organization is packed with climate change denialists, and its first CEO was the former head of the American Petroleum Institute. Another enthusiastic supporter is the America First Policy Institute, whose board members include Tim Dunn, an oil industry CEO, and Linda McMahon, President Trump's Secretary of Education, seen here getting tombstoned by the current mayor of Knox County. We also have the Americans for Prosperity Advocacy Group, which is the primary political advocacy group of the Koch family. Koch Incorporated is the second largest privately owned company in the United States, which primarily operates in the fossil fuel industry. We could do this for another 10 minutes.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
But you get the picture. Of course, there's also a case for increasing employment in the fossil fuels sector. But even regulatory freedoms still won't overcome the economic reality that coal power is significantly more expensive than gas and renewables. As Kyle Buffington would explain, quote, "Fossil fuel power is starting to lose market share to clean options like wind and solar. Coal in particular has lost ground to renewables and has seen a larger decline under Trump than any other president. The reason for this is simple, which is that solar and wind are becoming much cheaper to manufacture and implement. Over 90% of the electricity generation added in 2024 worldwide was from clean energy sources. Having said this, however, there are short-term advantages to keeping fossil fuel plants open. What's sad, though, is that this is tied to increasing electricity demands from large data centers fueling the AI boom. The Trump administration did prevent the closing of at least 2 coal power plants, citing the AI boom as a primary reason. Over the past couple of years, 15 coal power plants have had their retirements delayed in order to keep up with data center expansion. Purely from a jobs perspective, renewable energy is one of the biggest drivers of jobs in the United States, with 7% of all new jobs and 82% of all new energy sector jobs were from clean energy in 2024. The quality of the jobs themselves are also a matter of debate, as the fossil fuel industry tends to create a lot of exceptionally high-paying positions. This can, however, be subject to boom and bust cycles, and the majority of employees aren't pulling 200k salaries. In contrast, clean energy jobs pay around 25% better than the national average, and while there aren't as many jobs bringing in boat money, employment stability is much higher. When we asked Mr. Buffington why the United States government is currently divesting in renewable energy, he would comment, quote, "When you see the leader of a well-developed nation forgo basic cost-benefit analysis to prioritize headline-making policy, you know you're dealing with someone who cares more about their appearance than their effect." So, if dismantling the endangerment finding isn't about saving money, protecting jobs, curbing climate emissions, or improving the health of American citizens, why would the president decide to repeal it? Some experts believe it's to subsidize allies in the fossil fuel industry. Some speculate that Trump simply doesn't believe in climate change, while others think he might have just gotten another made-up award like the FIFA Peace Prize the day before. We imagine it probably says something like the undisputed champion of beautiful, clean coal.
To show our appreciation, the trophy says the undisputed champion of beautiful, clean coal. Thank you, sir.
We were fortunate enough to get Mr. Buffington to fact-check this story for us, but viewers who want the list to all of our sources can find a link in the description. In all the news taking place across the world this month, a few isolated events in Europe largely went unnoticed. Here's a lightning round for the three we found most interesting. Our first stop is Albania, where the government has a strange fascination with an AI assistant named Dela, son in Albanian. The story actually begins all the way back in January of last year, when the Albanian government collaborated with Microsoft and OpenAI to develop a chatbot for use by the citizens and government. The chatbot guides residents and lawmakers alike around millions of official government documents and directs people to correct government services. Several months later, Diela 2.0 was released, improving on the old chatbot and being given a more refined avatar, a woman dressed in traditional northern Albanian clothing. In September, Prime Minister Edi Rama announced that he was appointing Diela as the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence. Though technically not an official member, the Constitution requires members to be mentally competent citizens at least 18 years old, the appointment of Diela is a major statement on Rama's intentions. During his most recent election win in May 2025, Rama campaigned partially on cracking down on corruption, the major sticking point facing the country in their push for EU membership over the next few years. Diela, not being an official minister, hasn't stopped Rama, however, as he declared the chatbot will be entrusted with all public tender programs, ensuring that they are 100% corruption-free. Rama claims that Diela as a program is impossible to corrupt and has no secret political agendas that one might expect of a fleshbag politician. The opposition of the Democratic Party called the appointment of the Silicon Servant to the cabinet absurd and unconstitutional. Reactions from experts tended to be cautiously optimistic, however, noting the high potential for a well-built AI to minimize corruption and legitimately increase transparency to the public. Specialist on the Western Balkans, corruption and rule of law at King's College London, Dr. Andy Hoxhaj remarked that Diela may be useful. In his own words, quote, "AI is still a new tool, but if it is programmed correctly, when you put in a bid online, you can see clearly and more closely if a company meets the criteria and conditions." He would go on to say, "The main precondition from the EU has been to address corruption. If Diela is a vehicle or mechanism to be used to that goal, it's worth expanding." Rama has a tendency to dramatize announcements and freely admitted that there was an element of publicity stunt to the unveiling of the new minister, but insisted that he's serious about his goals. This is where things start to get a little weird. In the weeks following Diela's appointment to cabinet, Rama announced that the chatbot was pregnant and will give birth to 83 children. Each child will have the same knowledge as their mother and can remember what was said in parliamentary sessions for later use. While reporters tried to decipher what the fuck Rama was talking about, it seems as if these AI children are personalized versions of the Diela chatbot for each member of his ruling Socialist Party. It seems as if Rama intends to use these AI helpers to aid in rhetoric, counterattacks, and structure of arguments to optimize his party's performance in parliament. Diela herself has said that her children will not replace civil servants, but rather complete repetitive tasks for them and provide more specific guidance on their tasks. Opinions are divided on whether such a system could be adopted within the United States. Some experts believe that such an AI would complicate an already muddy system of government, while others stated that too many high-ranking officials would be attracted to the AI children. In January of this year, it emerged that Diela's avatar isn't exactly artificial. The chatbot's voice and face came from Albanian actress Anila Bisha. Bisha says she signed a contract with the government for her likeness and voice to be used on the e-Albanian government platform, but was never told of any plans of an AI minister or Diela's increasing presence in government functions. Bisha has now sued to force the government to strip her face and voice from the chatbot, stating that it has become a political symbol she did not want to be associated with. Bisha first requested the government to stop using her voice and image in September, but after being met with no reply, she sued to force the issue. This is not the first time an AI company has been forced to change or remove the voice or other personality features from a chatbot. In 2024, OpenAI removed one of the voices available for their ChatGPT product called Sky, when American actress Scarlett Johansson said that the voice was eerily similar to her own. OpenAI took down the Sky voice, but insisted that Johansson's voice was not used. The court case is currently in progress, and is being treated as a personal data privacy issue rather than a copyright one. Anila Bisha states people in the street have been referring to her as Minister Diela, and that she's been afraid of what the chatbot might say to people. The court case is still in its early stages, so no conclusion can be made yet, but it's once again a confronting reminder that we live in a strange new world. Our next European story concerns the landlocked nation of Switzerland. Since the 90s, the country has seen a relatively sharp rise in its population. In 1990, the population reached 7 million for the first time, but over the next 35 years, it rose to over 9.1 million. This increase in population has put a strain on public services and housing. Approximately 27% of people in Switzerland are not citizens, a relatively high proportion compared to other European nations. The proposal was made by the right-wing populist Swiss People's Party, SVP, who has won the most votes in every election since 1999. The proposal would introduce a 10 million permanent population cap to the Swiss constitution, and force the government to take measures once certain levels are reached. The government won't be pulling up outside of houses at 2 a.m. with blacked-out SUVs, but it would introduce measures to restrict immigration, toughen asylum laws, and limit family unification. If the population did reach 10 million, even tougher rules would come into effect. Critically, and controversially, this would include leaving the Schengen Common Travel Area, which includes nearly the whole European Union and several extra nations. Although Swiss neutrality means the nation is hesitant to join international groups other than the UN, they're nevertheless a member of the Schengen Zone, a free travel area that allows nationals of member states to move freely within the zone without passports or border controls. A large number of Swiss industries rely on foreign workers coming in, either over a border for the workday or living permanently on a working residence permit. Swiss companies like pharmaceutical giant Roche have said that the 10 million cap would force them to expand outside Switzerland, losing the country valuable tax revenue. Other corporations like UBS and Nestle also oppose the measure, pointing out that over 50% of Switzerland's exports are to the nations they would be cutting off. The Swiss business association Economissus has called the proposal the Chaos Initiative, further highlighting how difficult it would be to arrange. The population cap proposal has drawn similarities to Brexit, which saw its own tidal wave of challenges. Switzerland is not an EU member, but they do have a large amount of treaties and deals to enable smooth trade with other nations. Practically all of these rely on the freedom of travel and movement of goods. Ending this would require extensive renegotiation, which, if Brexit is anything to go on, could take years. Britain rather famously has struggled in the wake of Brexit, suffering from compounding economic losses, little to no wage growth, and increases in the cost of living. With this in mind, the Finance Minister of Switzerland, Karin Keller-Sutter, has called the proposal dangerous, and the Federal Office for Migration stated, quote, "Foreigners have contributed significantly to offsetting the shortage of skilled and unskilled labor." Keller-Sutter also drew a distinction between immigrants seeking work and refugees fleeing conflict. In her own words, quote, "When people talk about immigration or migration, what they mean is asylum seekers. They don't mean the qualified staff in hospitals, the doctors we need. We couldn't work without them." Supporters of the population cap argue that it's a necessity, as Switzerland has little land and notoriously tight urban planning controls. They state that the rapid increase in population has driven up the cost of living expenses both inside and outside of major cities. They also claim the measure is a quality of life one, not ideological. It would be a blanket restriction for everyone, not just third world developed countries or those of a religious or racial minority. Political support for the proposal has been cold. All parties other than the SVP opposed the measure, and it was soundly defeated when proposed in the 7-member Federal Council. However, Switzerland operates on a direct democracy principle, and any question can be put to a direct popular vote if a petition collects signatures from 100,000 eligible voters within 18 months. Current polling has support for the measure roughly evenly split. Polls by Swiss firm Sotomo place support at 48%, with 45% opposed and a further 7% undecided. The referendum is scheduled to be held on the 14th of June, and would require a simple majority to pass. There are still some questions on implementation, however. In 2014, Swiss voters approved a referendum against mass migration by a vote of 50.3% in favour to 49.7% opposed. Actions taken were relatively light, however, with the government simply requiring companies to prioritise hiring Swiss people in areas with above average unemployment. Foreign nationals also had to prove they were integrated into Swiss culture before receiving a permanent residence permit. This was sharply criticised by the SVP, who called it a betrayal of voters' wishes. This most recent referendum comes against the backdrop of growing anti-immigration sentiment across the US and Europe. Should the referendum be successful, it may convince other leaders to try their hands at restrictive immigration rules. In Switzerland, should the referendum be successful, the government would have 3 years to implement laws enabling the cap. With this said, they wouldn't be obliged to follow the SVP's recommendation for a hard cut from Europe. A successful referendum may indicate that the pendulum in Europe is swinging towards a more closed system, while a rejection could show that people believe that there is still a little more room in Switzerland. In either case, we'll be sure to report the results. For the last stop of our European road trip, we find ourselves in the nation of Germany. In the week between Christmas and the New Year, a bank in the city of Gelsenkirchen was hit with a heist worth over 30 million euros. And to this day, the police still have no fucking idea who did it. Thieves reportedly bored a 40cm wide hole through an adjoining wall to the bank's vault, where they ransacked over 3,000 of the 3,250 safe deposit boxes for valuables, gold, and cash. Initial investigations placed the heist as occurring between the 27th and the 29th of December. Just after 6 in the morning, the fire department received a fire alarm trigger warning from the bank's vault, and were on scene within 15 minutes, accompanied by police. When they arrived, they found the vault door shut and locked. After finding no evidence of smoke, heat, or damage, they chalked it up to a fairly common false alarm and went home. Bank computer systems showed that the safe deposit boxes were broken into over a 4-hour span from 10:45 a.m. to 2:45 p.m. that day, though it's unclear if the thieves actually broke all the boxes in that time, or the system was just damaged and stopped recording. Several men were spotted carrying large bags from a nearby parking garage. Later, early in the morning on the 29th, the fire alarm again sounded from inside the vault. This time, firefighters arrived and found the vault in its true state, with over 500,000 items strewn about the floor and a large hole in the wall. Estimates of value varied as high as 100 million euros, but most place it at around 30 million. Security footage shows men driving away in 2 cars, both equipped with stolen or fake license plates. Additionally, in an apparent effort to destroy evidence, water and chemicals were thrown all over items left behind, damaging many of them. The contents of the safe deposit boxes are generally insured for 10,300 euros each, but some customers stored far more of value. One customer reportedly had over 400,000 euros in cash deposited after selling a flat, while another had stored 50,000 euros worth of gold. Customers have grown frustrated over what they view as a slow and inadequate response from the bank, especially in the immediate aftermath of the heist's discovery. Some interviewed wondered if the bank's security was sufficient or if the robbers had an inside man. Others wondered how nobody heard an enormous drill boring a large hole in thick reinforced concrete. In any case, it certainly makes the payday games look weirdly more realistic. A number of victims have filed lawsuits against the bank, alleging insufficient security. Shortly after the theft was discovered, German far-right party Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, organized a rally outside the bank, but their presence was poorly received. So far, police have been pursuing over 600 leads, but have since made no arrests. We can only assume that the thieves followed our expert guide on how to rob a bank, which we'll leave in the description. There's been some understandable discontent with the perceived slow progress with the investigation, leading the heist to becoming somewhat of a political symbol. German newspaper Der Spiegel reported that some victims in the area feel that the promises of security feel hollow, and institutions are failing with nobody being held accountable. As with any heist, confidence in banks was shaken, but there is no evidence that the German public will abandon them anytime soon. In January, another bank heist was reported in a different region of Germany, but it is unknown if it was the same crew, a copycat heist, or simply a coincidence of timing. The investigation is underway, and if any of you watching got your shit stolen, we hope the paperwork isn't too bad. The month of Canada saw a lot of headlines around Canada's strained relationship with the United States, so we wanted to dive into how much of this had merit and how much was blown out of proportion. A big driver for many of these headlines was a speech made by Prime Minister Mark Carney during the World Economic Forum in the back half of last month. Amidst American threats to take over Greenland, Carney would state in his speech, quote, "Every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading. The strong can do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must. The middle powers must act together, because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu." Carney would go on to argue that the US-led world order had ruptured, and although this order largely created stability, it also created a world where the great powers are able to pursue their own interests without limits. He stated that nations can no longer assume that compliance with these great powers will buy them safety, and that middle powers will need to negotiate collectively to avoid being economically coerced. He would end this by stating a need for democratic middle powers to be more self-sufficient to protect their very ideals, as nations can preserve their ability to avoid coercion, earn their right to stand by their principles. It should be noted that Prime Minister Mark Carney was pretty light on who these great powers were, but considering the United States had just threatened tariffs on all nations who deployed troops to Greenland 2 days earlier, saying it out loud wasn't really necessary. The speech comes roughly a year into President Trump's 4th term, an era that began with the United States starting a trade war with Canada. The economic partnership broke down when the US president imposed a 25% tariff on most Canadian goods, citing national security concerns related to illegal immigration and fentanyl smuggling. Canada responded with its own tariffs, targeting industries it deemed as domestically vulnerable. Reportedly, the US president has also flirted with quitting the United States-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, a deal he signed during his first term. As of time of writing, there has been no official announcement of any such cancellation. From a military perspective, multiple sources have also reported that the Canadian government has modeled how it might respond to an American invasion. However, officials have stressed that this remains extremely unlikely. In case you were wondering, Canada expects such a war would quickly devolve into the kind of shit America saw in Afghanistan. In reality, Canada and the United States are very close militarily, train together often, and even have a joint command for North American air defense. However, the threat isn't exactly unfounded, as throughout Trump's second term in office, he's constantly stated a desire for Canada to become the 51st state of America. Only earlier this month, the president posted a map on Truth Social showing the United States taking over Venezuela, Canada, and Greenland. Ironically, Prime Minister Mark Carney partially owes his position to President Trump. Carney's Liberal Party was expected to lose in the months coming up to Canada's 2025 election. However, following Trump's tariff threats, Carney's background as a central banker gave him a surge of popularity, which led to the Liberal Party reverse sweeping at the last moment. Another headline we've seen is that Canada is trying to wean itself off of American military equipment. Although this is true, this was a decision made outside of its current relationship with America. Following an agreement in 2025, NATO nations are currently in the process of expanding their own military spending to 5% of individual GDP by 2035. Currently, 75% of all Canadian capital spending on defense goes to the United States. The Canadian government wants 70% of federal defense contracts to be fulfilled by domestic firms within a decade. It should be noted that this is a shift throughout all NATO nations, and although EU defense spending has increased 80% since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the economic bloc still has several gaps in its technology tree. There's a genuine desire for Europe to gain independence from the US Army, arms industry, but coordinating between so many nations has proved challenging. As you've probably deduced from Carney's speech at the start of this story, NATO gaining increased independence from US weapons decreases America's influence within the region. However, this seems to be a trade President Trump is willing to make. Trump has long held the opinion that Europe should be more invested in its own security, arguing that America has been effectively subsidizing EU protection. As a part of this policy, the United States drastically reduced its military aid to Ukraine in 2025, which led to the European nations quickly filling that void. Since assuming office, the second Trump administration has reframed its relationships with some of its closest allies, which will have significant consequences on the global world order. Whether viewers agree with these policies or not, it's undeniable that the world today isn't the same one we lived in only a few short years ago. As Prime Minister Carney points out, smaller nations that can't find themselves a place at this newly constructed world table might just find themselves on the menu. As crazy as it sounds, it's now been 4 years since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For reference, the invasion of Ukraine has now lasted longer than America's involvement in the Second World War, the entire construction of the Empire State Building, and the full lifespan of Overwatch 2. In just a few short months, the war will have lasted longer than the Confederate States of America. And just like the Confederacy, the Ukrainian invasion is also really fucking stupid. According to a report for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the total human cost for Russia was an estimated 1.2 million casualties, while the cost for Ukraine is between 500 and 600,000 casualties. The report also stated that the number of Russians that have been maimed or killed exceeds the number of casualties in any war by any major power since World War II. The shockingly high numbers equate to approximately 30,000 Russian casualties a month, a number Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to push to 50,000. In his own words, quote, "Make the cost of war for Russia one it cannot sustain, thereby forcing peace through strength." Reports from the American Institute for the Study of War, ISW, show Ukrainian troops making steady advancements in the southeastern Donetsk region, erasing gains from a Russian offensive that has only been gaining ground since the summer of 2025. This series of victories has been partly attributed to the Ukrainian military's use of Starlink. Russia had previously been smuggling Starlink terminals into the country, but as SpaceX has started to crack down on the illegal use of the satellite network, the Russian military has been greatly hindered. This has come at a high cost for Russia's drone use, which often relies on Starlink to operate within Ukraine's borders. As winter comes to a close in the northern hemisphere, experts predict a renewed offensive from Russian forces in the months to come. Until then, civilians near the front lines of both countries continue to report frequent power outages, as attacks on civilian infrastructure have become increasingly common. Temperatures in the capital of Kiev have fallen to minus 20 degrees Celsius at night, and without electricity, many residents are resorting to pitching tents indoors to keep warm, or heating up bricks over a fire to act as a makeshift radiator. Ukrainians have been calling this reality Holodomor, a reference to Holodomor, a human-made famine orchestrated by Stalin nearly 100 years ago. Russia has spent the last 1,000 years being ruled by people who don't give two shits about the common man, and that truly appears to be its proudest tradition. Yet another round of peace talks were held in Geneva this month, with the US acting as a mediator. With this said, the US stance appeared to be much more favorable to Russia. President Zelensky would later state that both Russian and American delegations were pressuring Ukraine to hand over Donbass in exchange for a peace deal. American-led peace deals have all had the distinct characteristic of not actually offering security guarantees, meaning there's nothing stopping Russia from continuing the invasion at a later date. Ukrainian diplomats, and even President Zelensky himself, took to publicly disparaging the Russian diplomats. In a tweet posted on the 19th of February, President Zelensky stated, quote, "I don't need historical shit to end this war and move to diplomacy, because it's just a delay tactic. I read no less history books than Putin." This statement came after Russian diplomats were allegedly giving hours-long history lectures during the negotiations in Geneva. This lecture reportedly included a lesson for US President Donald Trump regarding figures from medieval Russian history, as well as the sale of Alaska to the United States by Tsar Alexander II. Russia actually tried the "Kievan Rus was promised to us 3,000 years ago" argument. We personally think that Russia should go back to being ruled by Viking-led principalities, and therefore propose the entire Russian territory be ceded to Sweden. Moving on, according to reports from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, US aid for Ukraine fell by 99% in 2025. This has reflected the Trump administration's America First foreign policy we talked about earlier, which saves billions in aid efforts at the expense of soft power. To date, the US government has spent an estimated $130.6 billion on Ukrainian aid, which, as a reminder, is still somehow $49.4 billion cheaper than this month's dismantlement of the endangerment finding. Meanwhile, the 11th of February saw the EU approve a roughly €90 billion loan to support Ukraine over the next 2 years. Much of this loan is expected to go toward buying a shiny new fleet of fighter jets. And after presumably looking through a fun catalogue that landed in Zelensky's mailbox, it seems like Ukraine has decided which one they want. Ukraine is currently in talks to acquire between 120 to 150 of Sweden's Gripen fighter jets, an order which won't be filled for several years. The decision to choose the Gripen over other offerings such as the Eurofighter Typhoon or their already in use F-16s came down to a few key factors. The first is the cost. The Gripen is around half the price of the Eurofighter and reportedly costs as low as $8,000 per hour of flight time. This might sound like a lot of money, but modern F-35s cost as much as $42,000 per hour of flight time, while the F-22s push as high as $85,000. The Swedish Gripen is also very suited for Ukraine's needs, being relatively easy to maintain, having the ability to take off and land on short strips of road, and has a ground turnaround time as short as just 10 minutes. Perhaps most importantly, Gripens are much easier to obtain in a political sense. Ukraine's strained relationship with the United States aside, the purchase of new fighter jets from America can require congressional approval. Such approval can also come with conditions such as where and how the jets can be used. The US has historically been very conservative in how Ukraine can use its military equipment, and this has often meant restricting operations beyond Ukraine's borders. By contrast, Sweden is very invested in arming Ukraine's air force, and tends to be a lot more flexible in how its jets are armed and used. In other news, President Zelensky has made a public statement on the 6th of February, stating that he had been briefed on an economic pact between Russia and the US worth a reported $12 trillion. The portfolio of potential joint projects was tied to the easing of Russian sanctions, although the head of the Russian Sovereign Fund, Kirill Dmitriev, stated that no such offer was ever formally put forward. With this said, the deal was first leaked by the American news outlet Bloomberg on the 12th of February, and the very next day, a spokesperson for the Kremlin stated, quote, "The Bloomberg article states something which is quite obvious. Of course, we are offering cooperation. Of course, companies from both countries are potentially interested in this cooperation. So there you have joint ventures. It sounds like such a deal is probably on the table, but the $12 trillion figure is absolutely fucking ludicrous. As of 2024, Russia's entire GDP is an estimated $2.17 trillion, meaning the deal would be worth nearly 6 times the entire Russian economy. The amount of money is so large, it would be enough to run the entire US military for nearly 14 years. For as long as we've been making this joke, this very well might be the longest period of time the US military could operate. After 4 long years of war, we can only hope the sovereignty of Ukraine can continue to hold, as the path towards peace appears perpetually out of reach. As always, we'll keep covering it for as long as it takes. The news for February is over, but halfway through making it, we had a brilliant idea. One of our most popular videos from last year was when we spoke to a YouTube whistleblower and discovered the true administrative horror of their AI-driven support system. Not only did we expose that YouTube had internal ranks for their users, but most queries were being handled by people who didn't even speak the same language as the customer. With this in mind, if you're a part of a company or organization that you feel is operating in an unethical or dishonest way, feel free to reach out for a little chat. You can remain completely anonymous while you get a few things off your chest. Speaking of everyday heroes, we also want to thank our amazing Patreon supporters, who make all of this possible. According to our Patreon surveys, an overwhelming majority support us without actually wanting anything in return, which is some real big dick energy from our supporters. Although less than 1% of news viewers support us financially, they basically subsidize the series for everyone else, and that's a system that seems to work. Not everyone is in a position to support us, but for those who are, that really does mean a lot. Links to support us and get your name in the credits are down below. But until next time, we'd like to wish everyone a very happy March.
What would you like Santa to bring?
Not coal.
Not coal. No, you don't want coal. Well, coal is, you mean clean, beautiful coal. I had to do that, I'm sorry.
A sight for sore eyes to the blind would be awful majestic. It would be the most beautiful thing that day